It's not all bad. It's just some bad. But the sum is significant, unfortunately. So, okay. Hi, everyone. Good to see you. Thanks for coming. I hope you're able to find a spot. It's a joke. There's plenty of seats left. Still plenty of good seats available. Hi to everyone who's watching at home. Hopefully you can hear me. We won't get any complaints. There is some reading material, so there's some that Norman passed out. Hopefully everyone has one. This was a statement that was put out by a variety of Reform institutions, including the CCAR, the Central Conference of American Rabbis, which is the Reform Rabbis Union, of which I'm a board member. But I can tell you, I was not consulted when this statement was put together. But usually whenever I am consulted, I'm in the minority, and my voice is not heard, so it doesn't matter anyway. So what's more fun for a moderate to right-leaning Reform rabbi than to have a class where you can just bash the leaders of the Reform movement? I mean, that's like, this isn't even the job, it's more of a perk. No. Although I would tell you, I don't really talk about politics that often, but I tend to be liberal on almost everything, with the exception of Israel, where I'm not really liberal at all. But on everything else, I tend to be. But that's neither here nor there, except with regard to Israel, which is what I want to talk about. So before we get into where the Reform movement stands on Israel, October 7th, going forward, ceasefires, two-state solutions, occupation, all that. Before we get into that, I want to, and where it's going, I want to give you a little bit of the history of Zionism and the Reform movement going back all the way to the 1860s. Okay. Some of you have probably been to some of the original bastions of Reform Judaism in America. Maybe you've traveled to Charleston, or you came with me to Charleston, or when we had that trip from Beth Am, or you've been to Savannah, or you've been to New Orleans, or Memphis, or any of these places. And you have to understand that the original Jews who came to this country, coming, 1840s, 1850s, 1860s, and then really coming between 1880 and 1920. If your family came to America before 1882, you're old school. That's loud. That tells him it's time for a cookie. All right, I have the same. So, if you came before 1880, you're really an old school American, and probably Sephardic, because the Jews who came before 1880 were mainly Jews who came from places like Brazil or Jamaica. And the reasons why, because they were traders, and because when the Portuguese got to South America, they brought with them the Inquisition. And all of a sudden, the Sephardic communities that were there, who had left Spain, from 1492 and ultimately ended up there, now felt very uncomfortable with the Portuguese coming to town, and they made their way, and some of them ended up in places like Charleston. Why the first Jewish community in Charleston? Because that's where the port city was, and that's where they ended up. And a lot of them were traders anyway, and so from there they moved into some of the smaller communities, and okay. But by 1880, the pogroms started. Alexander II was assassinated in Russia, and the pogroms really started to spread throughout all of Central and Eastern Europe, and 2 million Jews, what an enormous number, 2 million Jews came to America between 1880 and 1920, and I don't know if all of our families came during that time. Mine definitely did. Our family name, by the way, was Altman, and in order to escape Russia, they needed to change their name to have a non-Jewish sounding name. And so they took the initials of my great-great-great-grandfather, which was Ben Harav Zusia, the son of Rabbi Zusia. Well, Ben Harav Zusia was Bet Resh Zion. And Bet Resh Zion is Barras. And when they came to America, somehow it was Baras, and then at some point a second R was added, and then we moved to Miami, and now it's a Latino name pronounced Barra. And whenever my daughter played basketball for Gulliver, whenever they would announce her in the beginning, they would always say, Ella Barras! And I go up to the scorekeeper and say to him, you know, my family didn't hide in a cemetery overnight to escape Russia with a Hebrew name so that you could turn it into a... No, I didn't. But 2 R's to Latinos looks Latino. And so whenever they pronounce, a Gulliver, which is like the United Nations, my daughter doesn't have 2 friends from the same country. You know, her best friend's Norwegian, her other best friend's Argentinian, her third best friend is Portuguese. I mean, every single one of them, which is why they're all getting into the Ivy League and she isn't. That's a different class. That's a different class. She's doing fine. Don't worry about her. But between 1880 and 1920, now you have Ashkenazic Judaism become the far prevalent type of Judaism in the United States, where before that, the 50,000 Jews that were here before the Civil War were primarily Sephardic. Well, those Jews who came here, Zionism was barely an idea. You know, by 1840, there were some Jews, the first wave of Aliyah, who were moving to Israel and saying, okay, we're going to go there, but what's there? This was before Mark Twain told us how disgusting it was, but what's there? It's the Ottomans. They don't love Jews. It's swamp. It's poor. It's not, we don't speak the language. It's not for us. And some Jews said, things are so bad in Europe, we're going to go. And they started to build a couple of kibbutzes. Most of them got malaria and came back, but some stayed. Later, by the time Alexander II's assassinated, a lot more Jews start going, and then you have Herzl, and then you have the Dreyfus Affair, and now you have real Zionism. But the Jews who were here before Herzl, who built the synagogue in Charleston, said, this is our Palestine. That's literally what he said. The first rabbi, I forget his name, it's in my book, actually, which you probably haven't read, like most people in the world. But I mentioned the name of the rabbi in Charleston at the end. But he says, this is our Charleston, this is our Palestine. And he gets a very bad rap in Zionist history as being someone, and this Reform Judaism in general sorts of gets this idea of being anti-Zionist because they were trying to make a home for themselves here. But it wasn't like today. It wasn't like saying, this is the forever home of the Jewish people, Charleston, South Carolina. Meanwhile, there's 7 million Jews in the 8th strongest country in the world in Israel. It wasn't like that. We finally found a place where they're not slaughtering us, where they're saying they accept us. It's a beautiful country. If we can't make it here, we're not going to make it anywhere. And so the earliest seeds of the Reform movement weren't interested in Zionism because they were all in on this. And it wasn't like they could have just said, you know what? If this doesn't work out, I'm going to go down to Atlanta. I'm going to get a Delta flight. I'll be in Israel in 12 hours. You know, to just schlep from Charleston to Palestine in 1860 was not realistic. Who's going to do that? You know, so what they said was, we don't have any other options. We finally found a country where they seem to at least say that they're going to accept our religion where no one else will. They're also preoccupied with race, and we happen to be European and not African. And okay, so we're here. And maybe we can make a go out of it. But it comes off retrospectively as looking like they were anti-Zionist, when all they were really saying was, we're going to try and make a go of it here. There's nothing there anyway. What do you want to go to? You think the Ottomans are looking for us? They're not. Okay. So that's how the earliest platform, which came out in 1863, the Pittsburgh Platform, the first platform of Reform Judaism, basically said, we're not schlepping over there. We're here. We're trying to make a go of it. We're proud to be in America. They're doing something that we've never seen before. They're welcoming Jews. We've never seen that. The only reason we're here is because we got kicked out of somewhere else. We're going to try and make a go of it. Janice, can we close? Thank you. Okay, so that's sort of the way that Reform Judaism begins. 1880, 1890, 1900. And you start to get the feeling that even as other movements are becoming more Zionist, leading towards World War I, the Reform movement is dialed in and is all in on the United States and trying to make a go of it here and really saying, what is there to go to? And it's not until, and so the Reform movement is very late to the Zionist bandwagon. And it's not until World War II, let's say it again. It's not until the 1930s, when the movement comes out with another platform, that the Reform movement in America starts to see a need for a homeland in Palestine. And while Herzl is walking around Europe saying, this isn't going to work, we need to go somewhere else, they'll never accept us here, so let's go to Palestine, the Jews in Baltimore and New York and Philadelphia are saying, they do accept us. We are here. Why would we go there? There's nothing there, first of all. I understand what you're doing, and that's fine for you. But your argument is we need to go to Palestine because they don't accept us here. And they do accept us here. If you think that 1900 in New York looked like 1900 in the Pale of Settlement, they didn't. Was there anti-Semitism here? Of course. But they're not coming to slaughter us. That's our standard. You know, right? You know, if they're not coming to slaughter us, it's paradise. Right? You saw the summary of the commercials at the Super Bowl? The Christians say, come and join us. The Scientologist commercials, come and join us. The Jews commercials, leave us alone. That and Taylor Swift is the Super Bowl this year. You're not going to get this kind of cutting analysis at other shuls. You know, this is, you pay extra and the cookies. That's what you get here. Okay. So, by 1933, though, and by 1937, when the Columbus Platform is written, the Reform movement has to change its mind and say, originally we said, we don't need to invest in a Jewish homeland. We don't need to pour in our, if other people from Russia want to go there, have at it, but we're happy here. I'd rather build up Baltimore. I'd rather build up St. Louis. I'd rather build up Cleveland. If you want to go live and drain the swamps from Russia, have at it. But then comes 1933, and a Jewish community that's totally endangered, and a United States that's not willing to accept them. And all of a sudden, the Reform movement says, we need a homeland for the Jewish people, for them. For who? Europe's Jews. Not for us, we're good. But for Europe's Jews, we need a homeland for them there. And that was the beginning of Reform Zionism. Excuse me, it was that we need a homeland for the Jews who aren't safe. And we're as safe as we've ever been here in America, but they need to go there, and that's how it began. Now, by the time World War II was over, 1945, obviously everyone has a much different view because 6 million Jews were slaughtered. And now we say to those Reform Jews, had you helped build the country before, we could have got those Jews out. They would have had somewhere to go, and we could have avoided this catastrophe. So thanks for nothing. And you're the richest Jewish community in the world, and what have you done for us? And we say, you're right. And in the late 40s, Israel's established, and the Reform movement becomes officially, for the first time, really, a completely Zionist movement. But what I've just showed you is that it took a while, but the reasons, aren't as bad as they look. Because you look back at a rabbi in 1860 now and say, who says Charleston is our Palestine, or Charleston is our Jerusalem, and America is our Palestine, and you say, how could you be so anti-Zionist? But that's not really what he was saying. What he was really saying was, if we can't make it here, in this country that accepts us, we're not going to make it anywhere. And to a certain extent, he was right. Because the Jewish world needed America. God knows where we would have been if the 2 million Jews who came to America were slaughtered too in the pogroms, and we wouldn't have had an American Jewish community. Could there have even been in Israel without the support of America, without Harry Truman, without the UN? Who knows? Maybe. But, America, huge help. Harry Truman recognized Israel 13 minutes after it was declared, and had all the influence in the UN to get the United Nations to vote for the partition. So, who knows? Who knows? But America came to the Jewish people right when we really needed it. Not enough, though, to prevent the Holocaust. What's that?
And late.
Lee?
Late.
Oh, late, right. 100%. 100%. Okay. Fast forward, 1948, now there's a country. By the 60s, the Reform movement was really all in on Israel, because by 1963, the Reform movement bought a campus in Jerusalem and required all of its rabbinic students to spend 1 year in Israel, which was a massive, massive change and a huge commitment. Now, if you've ever, I don't know if you know where the Hebrew Union College is on King David Street in Jerusalem, but it's one of the most prime pieces of real estate on the entire planet. And the reason that the Reform movement has it is because there was a synagogue, a Reform synagogue in Talpiot, that was firebombed by Orthodox Jews because they were Reform. And at the time, the mayor of Jerusalem was Teddy Kollek. And Teddy Kollek was so disturbed by that he said to the Reform movement, I'm going to give you a prime piece of property right next to the King David Hotel. And that's where the Hebrew Union College campus is. I studied there 1998. I think there's still a plaque there, where I was there. You can go visit it. They may have taken it down. I put it up. I don't know if they took it down. Tour groups go to see it, But that's a major commitment, to send all your rabbinic students to spend time learning in Israel, to travel the country, to learn Hebrew. It turns out it's useful, if you want to read the Torah, to know some Hebrew. Before 1963, Reform rabbis, not so strong on the Hebrew or the Torah, or much. But really in that period, they started to upgrade the academic experience and the expectations and the Hebrew and the text study and so forth, and it became a different kind of thing. And what you saw from there is that synagogues started to pop up around the state of Israel, Reform. Today there are about 75 Reform synagogues in Israel. Our sister congregation, Har El, was the first Reform synagogue in Jerusalem, 1957, I think. And from there, you started to see a little bit of a presence of Reform Jews in Israel, but American Jews in Israel really becoming very Zionist. Now, where you have some issues, and this is kind of what we need to focus on with the rest of our time today, is a post-1967 world. Because before 1967, there's no such thing as Palestinians. They don't exist. All the Arabs who lived in the West Bank were Jordanians. And before 1948, they were part of the British Mandate. And before that, they were part of the Ottomans. But they were never under the control of Jews, and they never called themselves Palestinians. Same thing with the Palestinians in the Gaza Strip. Before 1967, they were Egyptian. And pretty much all the way back, Egypt controlled the Sinai and the Gaza Strip. In negotiations with the Camp David Accords, Israel tried to give back the Gaza Strip. Egypt didn't want it. Nobody wants it. Actually, the only people who want it are the Jews would take it. But we'd have to get rid of some people, although we're working on that. That's a war joke. There's been some funny, well, there was a video that came out, Gaza real estate. And there was a 3-story building, and they showed a corner apartment. And the guy is speaking, and he says, "Great prime land right on the corner, 3rd floor." And then the building gets hit by a rocket, and you see it go down, and he goes, "2nd floor." And then it starts falling in, and he goes, "Ground floor entrance." And then he goes, "Parking lot available." You know. All right, whatever. So after 1967, you now have these Palestinians who are controlled by Israel, 1 million of them. And now you have, beginning with when Menachem Begin becomes prime minister, talk about settlers. And Jews moving into the West Bank, Jews moving into the Gaza Strip, and now you have some real problems. And for the first time, you can see a huge difference between maybe how Americans view Israel in a post-67 world as they did before 1967. But because before 1967, you had this feeling that we're still pretty close to the Holocaust. We still have to be very careful about Israel's security. We still have to make sure that there's a place for Jews to go to always be safe as a safe haven. But after 1967, and Israel showed its might and was able to destroy all the armies around it so easily in 6 days, you get this feeling that Israel's now not the refugees from the concentration camps, but they're a powerful army who are now the oppressors over a weaker minority. And that changes the view of some in the reform movement. Okay. Slowly but surely, and especially once we get to the Oslo period, there's full support. You know, when I became a rabbi in 2002, the way that the reform movement, I don't mean reform Jews in synagogues, but I mean the leadership of the movement, the professors in the rabbinic school, the way that we viewed Israel was not so much dealing with the Palestinians or politics at all, but was really the struggle of the rights of Reform Jews in the face of the Orthodox power that doesn't let us do anything. Doesn't recognize our rabbis as rabbis, doesn't recognize our conversions, doesn't do our weddings, all that stuff. All the problems we have with their, what's called the Misrat HaPanim, the Ministry of the Interior. And that was pretty much the thing. Then the Second Intifada broke out, and we had to pay more attention to that. But eventually that ended too after a few years, and we went, we rested on this notion, a pre-October 7th notion, that Israel controls its own destiny, that nobody could ever destroy Israel, that Israel can protect itself, that Israel has nuclear weapons, that Israel has the best military in the Middle East, that Israel is constantly supported by the United States and the West, and they could do whatever they want. So if they want to make the lives of the Palestinians easier, they can, and it won't affect their security or the existential threats that exist to the state of Israel. And that became the way of viewing Israel from the liberal American Jewish movement, but also that swept over the leadership of the reform movement. Now, at the same time, I don't remember what year it was, but I guess maybe 15, 16 years ago, the Reform movement got a new president, Rick Jacobs. Eric Yaffe was the previous president. Now, here's the difference. Here's the difference in the way they view the world. Eric Yaffe said that social action is the main key towards living a good Reformed Jewish life. So Rick Jacobs took over and said, the other side of the coin is social action and social justice, and we need to flip it over. So they're two sides of the same coin, these guys. And what has happened, I know Rick Jacobs, he's a good friend of mine. Not a good friend, but we're friendly. When I see him, he knows me, he knows my family. He's a wonderful person. But his priorities over the last 15 years, and really went back even further than that, has not been Zionism. It's been social action and social justice. And they have spent almost all of their time focusing on the needs and the struggle of every minority except the Jewish people. Okay, all that's fine. Not the except for the Jewish people part. But all the other stuff, if you want to do that, that's fine. I think, in my opinion, it came at the cost of minimizing the importance of mitzvot and elevating the importance of social justice and social action as the prime mover of leading a Jewish life to the detriment of all the other mitzvahs. At the same time, there aren't as many Reform synagogues as there used to be. And the economy hasn't been so great at various periods, and the amount of money that those synagogues have isn't as much. And so the Reform movement is much more poorly funded. And so what it used to be was the Reform movement, what made the Reform movement so great, and probably better than all the other movements, was that we were a movement, and that we were united congregations, and there were united rabbis, and we had an amazing rabbinic school. But what that meant was, in the Reform movement, they had a rabbi whose job it was to oversee each region of the country. And they had different, organizations in each of the different parts of the countries that got together, that had conferences, that met, that worked on their local camps at the school, had really great youth group events and all this stuff. We don't have those anymore. Those regional directors, they were all let go. Those positions don't exist anymore. The camps aren't as strong as they used to be, although a lot of kids go to them, but the Judaica at those camps is pretty weak. And all the programming that we had regionally no longer exists. So what the Reform movement really is today is a president who's not the president of a movement, he's the ambassador of a movement. He represents us in different rooms, in different offices, but he doesn't have the office in New York is like 3 people, where it used to be hundreds. Now it's just, we don't have a magazine anymore. They don't do mailings anymore. They don't do curriculum that they pass down through all the different congregations. If you go to Chabad and you take an adult education class at Chabad of Kendall, and then you go to Chabad of Anchorage, Alaska, it's the same curriculum. JLI, wherever you go. It's the same stuff. And they got experts in New York printing it out, and it's ready-made, and it's beautiful, and it looks great, and we don't have anything like that. We don't even have the biennial anymore. Doesn't exist. I mean, it was killed by COVID, but they haven't restarted. So they just had a meeting, and they had like a big get-together. They had 700 people, which isn't bad, but it used to be 5,000 to 10,000. Doesn't exist anymore. Why? They can't afford it. So who they are it's not what it used to be, and that's weakened the movement. And to a certain extent, we here at Beth Am, if you ask me, what is our connection to the Reform movement, meaning what do we get from them? I'd be hard-pressed to come up with anything. Other than sending our kids to Camp Coleman, which is very few. We send maybe 15 to 20 kids at most, because it's not fancy enough for our kids. They don't have, water skiing and, God knows what. Why go to a Jewish camp right down the street when you can go to Maine? So, water skiing. They have a bigger lake. I don't know, whatever. I'd be very hard pressed. What does our day school have to do specifically with the people who are working at the URJ? I mean, we may have the same values and stuff, but literally nothing. So we sent our 10th graders to a conference, a confirmation conference in DC a few weeks ago. And all the confirmation classes from all the reform movements, they send their kids. And it's this wonderful conclave that they have. And they go up to the Hill and they lobby on different things. And it was great in the days where they go and lobby about gun violence or the environment. But some of our kids came back disillusioned this year about what the reform movement, the talking points that they wanted them to say about the war. And they said, I don't agree with that. I'm not calling for a ceasefire. You know, I'm not calling the territories occupied. And our kids came back disillusioned. So it's like, what are we paying dues for? We're probably not going to send them next year. We're going to send them probably to a JNF conclave instead, which is way more fun. Although they had fun either way. As long as you're with other kids, and there's other boys and girls there, and you're a teenager, you're happy. You just let them go in there. Let them go in the hotel and, oh, wow, this is great. Okay, so now we have what our movement has become, in a lot of ways, is a bastion for left-wing politics. And not just left-wing politics, but far left-wing politics. So much so that the stances that the reform, we're not going to have time to read this whole thing, but the stances that the reform movement has taken in this letter that they just put out on Israel, if you look at the recent polling for the next, if there was a vote for Knesset today, anyone who espoused this view, meaning like the Labor Party or left of the Labor Party in Israel, if you look at the current polling right now, none of those parties that would agree with this would get enough votes to even have one seat in the parliament. Not one. And so what we're saying is, we as the leading, largest movement of Jews in North America are left of every single, now I don't count the Arab groups. The Arab groups would love it. But of the Zionist groups, meaning the Jewish groups in the Knesset, which is all of them except for a couple Arab parties, none of them who would agree with this statement would be represented at all of any of the 120 seats in the Knesset. And so if you look to the left of where every single Knesset member is, even the one all the way on the left, the Reform movement is further to the left of that. And congregants around the country who read these statements are saying, what is this? What are we paying dues for? Why are we even in this movement? I don't agree with it. Now, I'll tell you this. The letter is probably 85% good. But there's 15% of it that's so problematic that it's like, what? Now, my other problem is this. If you read through it, first of all, you can notice it's long. It's 3 pages. If I was writing this statement, here's the statement that I would have written. You ready? I'm going to tell you the whole statement. This should be the whole statement. We stand with Israel. Period. Rabbi Barras. That's it. That's the only message we need to send. But this message is prescriptive, which means it has a whole laundry list of things that Israel is supposed to do. So I don't know what news you're watching, but like if you ever I did something last night that I never do. For whatever reason, I think because my wife was talking to me, and I wasn't listening, but no. Yeah. She knows. But I have a great excuse. Because whenever she tells me to do something and then I forget to do it or I didn't do it, I'll say, she's like, I told you to go buy the soda. Yeah, but I wasn't listening when you told me. She said, you got a point. Yeah. So I had on the local news. Have you ever watched the local news here in Miami? Oh, my God. So the local news last night, the first news was a fist fight at Pollo Tropical in Pinecrest. There was a fist fight over a taco at Pollo Tropical here in Pinecrest. And yeah, I said to my wife, thank God we didn't miss this reporting. I mean, the next one was a Jewish guy, an Israeli. Someone had painted a Palestinian flag on an overpass, and he went and tried to cover it up, and then he got arrested for covering it up. But then the court said he wasn't trying to harm public property, he was trying to help, so they let him go. The third story, this past Shabbat, I was invited to the bar mitzvah of Rabbi Harlig at Chabad of Kendall, to his son's bar mitzvah. I couldn't go because we had a bar mitzvah here at the same time. But I wanted to go because he's a friend of mine. Yeah, so there was a boating accident, and it's a bunch of Chabadniks. And they're saying, we got in this boating accident, one of them was injured, we're going to be fine. And they said, we don't even live here for California. We're just in for a bar mitzvah. Next thing you know, there's Rabbi Harlig. Yeah, my family's here for a bar mitzvah. They're in for... So that actually, I'm glad I caught the local news for that one. I definitely wouldn't have wanted to miss that Pollo Tropical. I would have been very offended if I would have missed that. But so when you watch the local news, when I watch them reporting about Israel on CNN or MSNBC or Fox or whatever you watch, and you watch that, it is so superficial compared to watching the news in Israel. Because if you turn the news on, if you have whatever talking heads are there, and maybe one of them even has a PhD in what's going on in Israel, okay, fine. But they live most of their life in Bethesda. If you watch the news from Israel, which I watch every night, in Hebrew, you have a bunch of talking heads who've lived in Israel their whole life, who fought in the army, who every single person they know is in the army. They know 10 people who were killed on October 7th. They know 4 people who were hostages. It is so much more insightful that watching that compared to CNN is like watching CNN compared to the local news. It's such a totally different level.
So you almost want to watch Fox these days. I'm a CNN junkie too, but their reporting has been so biased. Not only that, but my concern about what you say in terms of UJR is that
URJ.
The larger portion of the people see that regardless. I mean, you gave us insight into what it is.
Right.
But that's not what appears on the surface. It appears and says it represents a majority, because we're the largest movement
Right.
In Judaism.
Okay, so now we're getting to the point.
Right.
Now we're getting to the point. But I had an hour to fill, so I had to give it a fill. But this is what... So I want to address this, because here's what's happening. The movement is represented by a few people. The president, the head of the CCAR, and so forth. They're running in one direction. Reformed Jews in the pews are running in a different direction. That's what we need to address.
And to add to that complexity, in Israel, the typical first grade class now, what I'm told, is about 29% Orthodox Jews, 29% Arabs, and 42-ish% and dropping secular Jews. And that trend is continuing to happen.
Yeah, exactly. They don't go to shul on Yom Kippur. They don't have seders.
Yom Kippur is the day to go to the beach.
Right.
Go buy bicycles.
But let's be careful when we say that, because when you go to Israel today, and I've been there, I'm going in 6 weeks. Actually, I'm going in 4 weeks. But when you go to, and I was there 3 times last year, there's a new trend in Israel. Being traditional Jew is becoming cool. And what you're seeing is, if you watch TV and you look closely at the soldiers, you see a lot of them wearing kippot, and a lot of them wearing tzitzit, and they don't know anything about Orthodox Judaism. But it's becoming cool. It's becoming part of the culture that in rock and roll, in their rap and stuff, they're bringing in Torah ideas, and it's just very trendy right now. Jewish tradition, for whatever reason, probably October 7th, it's just very trendy to be, it's part of the nationalism, and it's seeped into it in a way where in the early days, the kibbutzniks, and the Sabras wanted to get completely away from that and develop their own identity. It's now becoming very cool. But so when you're in Israel, and if you're in Jerusalem, you see Hasidic Jews all over the place. But when you're in Tel Aviv, and you're going to a building, and there's just like a commerce building, in Dizengoff or something, you're walking around. There goes your dentist. He's wearing a yarmulke. There goes your lawyer. He's wearing a yarmulke. They may vote for Lapid. They may vote for Benny Gantz. They're like normal people, but they're bringing tradition into your life. If you go to Jerusalem and you see a bunch of Hasidic Jews, they vote for who their Rebbe tells them to vote for. They don't even know who's running. We vote for Torah United. That's our party. That's who you vote for. But there are a growing number of Orthodox Jews who are not ultra-Orthodox. Now, you have to be very careful. The difference between ultra-Orthodox and modern Orthodox. Ultra-Orthodox shuts out the rest of the world that's not Jewish. An ultra-Orthodox person won't have a TV. An ultra-Orthodox person won't read Haaretz or Yediot Achronot. They read only ultra-Orthodox newspapers. A modern Orthodox Jew will go out to the movies, will go to medical school, will become a dentist, will play soccer, will live a, kind of what we would call a normal life, but we'll keep Shabbat, we'll keep kosher, we'll daven 3 times a day, we'll put on tefillin before he goes to work, before he takes your teeth out, whatever. The ultra-Orthodox Jew puts on his tefillin and then goes and studies Talmud for 15 hours, and, then goes home and yells at his wife or whatever. I don't know, who knows what they do. But, so, okay, there's a lot of abuse. It's a very repressed lifestyle. Okay, so just because there are a lot more growing Orthodox doesn't mean, though, that the country is necessarily moving more to the right, although they're probably a little more traditional. Okay, but now let's get to the heart of the matter. For the last 20 years, the Reform movement, in terms of its leadership, bless you, and also in terms of the newer generation of rabbis. This is also, this is where you get a lot of influence on Reform Judaism. Because, whatever I say, that you're automatically going to adopt that stance, right? No, but some rabbis, maybe not here, but some rabbis actually have some influence over their congregation. So, you come and teach stuff. But the newer generations are not so pro-Israel. Because they grew up in a reform world over the last 20 years that has become a bastion for left-wing politics. And what that means is, and I don't care what someone believes in terms of their politics. You know what a heretic is? You ever heard of a heretic? You know what a heretic is? A heretic is anyone who stands 1 centimeter to the left of me. That's what you do. So, what these new rabbis have grown up with in the last 20 years is they've decided to become rabbis because being a rabbi gives them a platform for their left-wing politics. Now, I don't care what their politics are, but what being a rabbi is supposed to be is giving you a platform for spirituality. for religion, not for politics. But that's why they're coming, and that's who we're getting. And so it's great if you love social action, it's great if you love tikkun olam, it's great if you love social justice, and I do. But where it hasn't been great is if you're really Zionist, because they're not there, just like so many of the other minorities in the intersectionality have bought into the idea that Israel is the white colonial oppressors and the Palestinians are the colored oppressed minority. They've bought into that too. And that's what our leadership has been espousing. And for the last 20 years, I've been saying that is complete and total nonsense. First of all, the majority of Israelis are not Caucasian. Second of all, and just to really put a stamp on it, look at the gay and lesbian community that has adopted, not all of them, but has adopted pro-Palestinian approach, whereas the Houthis yesterday crucified. I don't mean theoretically. They literally crucified 9 people for being gay. Put them up on a thing and crucified them. And you're not standing with Israel because they're the oppressors? When Hamas is aligned with the Houthis? It's just mind-boggling, but that's what's happened. And our youth have bought into that. Yeah, Abe.
If you say the curriculum at the Hebrew Union College was changed to become much more, I don't want to use a traditional, but much more Torah standardized, how come the teaching from the HUC hasn't influenced these younger rabbis in a more positive way than we are doing right now?
The teachers are under siege because the students have come in after 4 years at Columbia, after 4 years at Wellesley, after 4 years at Duke or God knows where, although Duke's been pretty good. And by the time they get to campus, they're not interested. I know 2 people that are in rabbinic school right now. Both of them are hardcore Zionists. One of them was my youth group student in Fort Myers, and the other one is the sister of a rabbi who's a good friend of mine. She's a rabbi in Naples, and she's a hardcore Zionist. Both of those 2 people tell me that they're uncomfortable being Zionist on campus. They're uncomfortable. And do you know, in rabbinic school, it was like we're living in the Twilight Zone. But the movement has made it comfortable for them. You know where they're then not comfortable? When they have to go into the real world and get a job and speak here. And come to you and say, we got to get rid of the occupation. And you go to a board meeting and say, we need to talk about your contract. Because they're setting them up to fail. And it becomes a real problem. But that's where the movement is. So this statement that you see, we're now at a point where our, October 7th happens, and the leadership of the reform movement is pretty much MIA, and they're putting out statements saying, we need to end the occupation, we need to call for a ceasefire, we need to tell Israel to do this, we need to tell Israel to do that, and we're all sitting around here like, we had a ceasefire on October 6th. Now, what are you talking about? Right.
Post-October 7th, if I describe myself, I moved far to the right.
Yeah.
As it pertains to Israel.
Yeah.
So how is that, what's the process by which they feed in from rabbis like you and our other rabbis here and other clergy around the country?
So there are 3 organizations, and the heads of those 3 organizations are the heads of the reform movement. The first organization is the URJ, it's the most powerful. The URJ, the Union for Reform Judaism, which used to be called the UAHC, Union of American Hebrew Congregations, the president is Rick Jacobs. He's a wonderful guy. He's a kind person. He's a smart person. He was the rabbi at Westchester Reform in Scarsdale for many years. His replacement, Jonathan Blake, is one of my closest friends. But he's a social justice, social action warrior, and that's his thing. He despises Netanyahu. He was in Israel all the time. During the judicial reform thing, he was there marching against it, preaching against it. You know, that was his thing. And he had all his passion in it. Since October 7th, he's been in Israel, but he hasn't been passionate. He's not a passionate Zionist leader. He never talks about Israel in a way that can get us excited about being Zionist. He only talks about it as how it pertains to the reform movement. So most of the time it's negative, because most of the time he's saying we're fighting against the Orthodox for our rights. We're fighting against women to be able to pray at the Kotel, which is fine. All those issues are important. But you never get from him, we love Israel. We're united. You never get that. And it's annoying. It's like being on the Supreme Court. Once you get that job, it's yours. As long, so what happened was, about 13 or 14 years ago, I mean, the URJ has a board. In fact, one of our members is about to be nominated for that board. And we've had two members of Beth Am that have been on that board for a long time. Mark Bookbinder was on the board. Jody Hessel's been on the board for a long, long time. And it's made up of, people from all over, URJ synagogues from all over the country, lay leaders, volunteer. And I guess they elect it. But what happened was, Eric Yaffe was president. And there were about 15 rabbis of the largest Reform congregations in the world were unhappy with the way things were going. So they said, if we don't get a new direction, we're dropping out of the movement. We're not going to, and that would have bankrupted the URJ because they were paying a lot of the dues. So Eric Yaffe retired, and from their cabal, one of them, they basically chose and said, he's going to be the one. And then it got through and he became. And there are now people of my generation who are in the same place as where those rabbis were 15 or so years ago, and who are all saying to each other now, is it time for us to do the same thing? And so I would not do that. If they called me and said, do you want to be president of the URJ? I would say, what took you so long? Of course I should have been of course I should be the president.
But apropos of what he said, the process for making a statement from URJ, they didn't, you just said, they didn't even call you.
Okay, so here's...
That questions the input from the other members.
So here's what they did. Let me answer the question. I didn't finish that. So he got together with the leaders of the other organizations, and there are a variety of them. There's the CCAR, which I'm a board member of. There are 18 rabbis in the country that are on that board. They got together with the executive director of that and the lay president of that, who got together with the Canners group, who got together with the president of the Hebrew Union College, who got together with the Brotherhood, organization, and the Sisterhood organization, and all of those leaders of all those organizations put this statement out, and they all signed it. Now, as a board member of the CCAR, I didn't become aware of this statement until it was already being about to be sent out. When you couldn't touch it. It was already done. So I'm going to go to the next board meeting and say, this is unacceptable to me. And they're going to say, who else thinks this is unacceptable? And my 3 friends will raise our hands. And the other 11 will say, I can live with it. And we'll lose. Like we always do. Because we're in the minority. Yeah.
I know you said this is too long for us to read rabbis right now. You said you object to about 15% of that.
Yeah.
Can you give us a highlight?
Yeah.
Maybe this is the direction that you would go. I'm not going to read it when I get home, but I'm just curious as to your opinion about the part that you find objectionable.
Yes.
I haven't read any of it. I'm just really interested in your opinion.
Okay. You know what? This will be fun.
No, I'm
No, because I don't remember exactly where it is, but let's go through and read it, and I'll explain. Okay, so here we are. The first paragraph, there's no problems. The second paragraph, our commitment to strong, vibrant Jewish democratic state. Of course, we agree with all that. There's no problems. We pray for the wounded. We hate Iran. We hate the Houthis. No problem. Israel's leaders have no greater responsibility than protecting the Israeli people. October 7th was heinous. Of course, we have no problem. Israel's goal of eradicating Hamas's military capabilities is just given. Hamas is ongoing, is just giving Hamas, okay, that's good. Hamas must be held accountable. Israel's government must do all it can to ensure the hostages' swift and safe deliverance. Okay. We also encourage and applaud the Biden administration. Okay, no problems. Hamas showed no regard for the humanity. Okay, no. Like again, 85% of it is fine. All this is fine. We agonize too over the two. Okay, so we agonize too over the nearly 2 million displaced people who are unable to attain the life essentials of food, water, shelter, medicine, and electricity. That's not true. They are not starving. They do have food and water. Israel's producing more than 2 million pita a day. And if anything is lacking, it's because Hamas has stolen or not allowed the stuff to come in. So I'm not okay with that line. And also, they should have said there, if any of these things are that we need to agonize, they should have pointed out that that's because of Hamas, not because of Israel. And it leaves it open to, wow, Israel's doing this to them, and I don't agree with that. The peaceful future we dream of includes an end to the West Bank occupation. That is completely horrendous, because what do you mean by West Bank occupation? Do you mean the parts of Jerusalem that are considered the West Bank? Does Israel have to retreat from Ma'ale Adumim? Does Israel have to retreat from Gilo and from all of these areas that are completely Jewish? What do you mean by West Bank occupation? And how can you occupy your own country? I mean, the land is Israel. How can you occupy it? So to me, just using the word occupation is an affront. And now saying we need to end it, well, what do you mean by ending it? And why is it our job to tell Israel where they need to give back land and how to protect themselves in the West Bank after what we just saw on October 7th? To me, that's outrageous. As our respective organizations have affirmed in resolutions, formal statements.
Rabbi, at that board meeting, maybe you should suggest to them to add in a sentence here about providing additional lands back to Native Americans in the USA.
It's another thing. I mean, how many, if Israel is a colonist, colonizer, how many other countries colonized? Like every single one of them? How many are you calling back to give their land back? And besides, if you want to give back a reservation in Oklahoma, it's not an existential threat to the state, to the United States. Giving back these lands in the West Bank could allow an October 7th thing where every Jew in Jerusalem is slaughtered. I mean, you're talking about less than a mile. It's crazy. All right, so foreign policy now, going back decades, ongoing West Bank occupation without a willingness to seek end through a peaceful resolution of the conflict. Really? You ever heard of Yitzhak Rabin? You ever heard of Shimon Peres? You ever heard of the Oslo Accords? You ever heard of the Y River Accords? You ever heard of Ehud Barak? You ever heard of the Second Intifada? We try all the time to give land back. They won't take it. So this is utter nonsense. Denying Palestinian right to self-determination is an impediment to peace. Well, so's terror. There wouldn't be a wall around the West Bank if there wasn't a Second Intifada. Before the Second Intifada, there was no wall. Why? Because they weren't blowing stuff up every day. Once they started blowing stuff up every day, we had to build a wall. And that's the impediment to peace? No, the impediment to peace is terror. So, again, very problematic. In this darkest of times, we remain committed to a resolution. And you have to remember, if you're in Israel reading this, this is coming from an organization that has been lukewarm in supporting you over the last 20 years. And you're supposed to listen to them tell you what to do? No, thank you. All right. In the darkest of times, we remain committed to a resolution of the conflict that will ensure Israel's security and allow for Palestinian self-determination and self-governance. Understanding that the creation of a Palestinian state will pose serious short-term security threats to Israel that will need to be addressed in any peace accords. Okay. Further, the widespread distrust of the Palestinians and their leadership in both Gaza and the West Bank, as well as deep Palestinian mistrust of Israel's leadership, will require significant efforts by Israelis, Palestinians, regional neighbors, and the international community. Okay. A successful and peaceful Palestinian entity remains vital to ensuring Israel's long-term security. For these reasons, we are deeply dismayed by Netanyahu's recent comments dismissing the possibility of a future peaceful Palestinian state. Really? In the wake of October 7th, when they just came and slaughtered everyone they could, and they tried to go further and slaughter everyone they could, you're going to tell Netanyahu, while he's in the midst of the greatest security threat to Israel since the Yom Kippur War, but really since 1948, and the worst day since the Holocaust, to start thinking about a peaceful Palestinian state? When Hamas, if there was an election today, would win? Even if you agree with this, even if you agree with it, why say it now?
Right.
Why now? It's ridiculous.
They've had 17 years.
Right.
It seems like they really turned a blind eye to the truth that they're not interested in peace. They never have been. They want the land Islamized. They want as many Jews dead as possible. And all the land to be Arab. No Christians either.
Right.
They don't, these people don't believe what I just said.
Right.
They really believe it's crap.
So here's,
I have to say, look, it bothers me, but what bothers me is not the message here. What bothers me is that this is portrayed as coming from
you.
Correct. If it was Rick Jacobs who said this, and he put his title as, hey, President of URJ, but it's me individually, it might bother me, but it would not be so offensive.
Need me? Yeah, I'm going to be a little late for it. Okay. Yeah. They can start without me.
But, what is going back to, from a policy perspective, what accountability does he or do we as congregants
Okay.
say, you know what, I saw this, it's an important message that you felt has to go out, but it does not represent me as a member of...
So I'll conclude by answering that. But before I do that, I showed this to my friend at APAC, who is he's pretty high up at APAC. And I said to him, what do you think about this? And he said, we don't police other statements. I said, I know, but I need to know what you think. And his main problem was, look now at all the things, going at the bottom of page 2 and the bottom of page 3, look at all the things that the Reform movement dictates to Israel that they need to do. In the middle of a war that is a really bad war, and a really painful war. And we're sitting over here in Manhattan and Miami and Kansas City watching Taylor Swift and telling Israel, while bombs are falling on them and their kids are in Gaza, that you guys need to go do all of this. Who are we to tell them what to do? Our kids aren't, maybe some of us, but most of our kids are not fighting. Most of us don't know people who are being held hostage or who were killed and slaughtered and stuff. They do. And they read this and say, the Reform movement, that's your Zionism. Now, of all the annoying statements they've made over the last 20 years, maybe once or twice I've had someone call me and say, I'm really upset about what Rick Jacobs said, or I'm really upset about what the movement said. Over the last week, I've had dozens of emails from congregants, maybe a dozen emails from congregants saying, why are we still part of this movement? I've never heard that before. I've never heard that from maybe more than one person, and that's the same guy who complains about everything. But now people are really saying, this is not for me. I don't support this. Yeah.
So what's our call to action to change that?
Okay, so I would like to answer that better next month. And here's why. because two very interesting things are happening that not a lot of people know about, but I want to tell you about. First of all, there are a number of rabbis in the Reform movement who've had enough, even before the war. And they started a new movement called Recharging Reform Judaism. And it was started by a rabbi in New York City named Ami Hirsch, who invited a certain group of rabbis to come to New York for a 3-day conference to talk about it. And it was last year, and I didn't go because it was on my daughter's birthday. But Rabbi Klepi and Rabbi Greengrass went. And it turned out to be very interesting, but led by probably a group of people. I don't want this on the record. Problem with the mic. I think it's back on. They're having another conference, and I'm not going to go to it because I don't think it has. I just don't think it has the wherewithal to do it. However, something very interesting is happening in 2 weeks. There's about 50 rabbis, Reform, Conservative, and Orthodox, who were invited by a family called the Lefels. So the Lefels are one of the largest supporters of AIPAC. And there's a program at AIPAC called the Lefels Scholars. And what they do is they take rabbinic students, Reform, Conservative, and Orthodox, and they send them to Israel with AIPAC to learn about AIPAC's mission. And they are sponsoring this conference, March 3rd to the 5th. And ironically, it just happens to be in Miami at the Aventura Turnberry resort, the Marriott Resort. They're having it there. I think they invited 50 rabbis, Reform, Conservative, and Orthodox. I'm one of the rabbis they invited. And they're going for 3 days to chart a new course for American Zionism. And it's going to be now this isn't just one rabbi from New York. This is a major Jewish foundation with a lot of resources behind it. And they've put together really some unbelievable rabbis who are all coming together to discuss this. So I'm going to be part of it. And that's why I say in March, because then I'll be able to report back to you where we're going. But in the final analysis, because of October 7th, all of the problems that a great number of us have been feeling in the Reform movement with respect to its Zionism, October 7th was the straw that broke the camel's back. And to the point to say, we cannot abide by this anymore. And the reason why it broke the camel's back isn't so much what happened in Israel after October 7th, but what happened in America. Because we saw that all these people that we've been cozying up to for 20 years, and all these people we've been marching with, and all the, Black Lives Matter side, and everyone we've been helping out, and then when we needed them, they're gone. They're gone. And we looked around and said, we took Israel's security for granted. And people like me who've been schlepping to D.C. for 20 years and going to AIPAC and saying we can't take Israel's security for granted, and everyone else told me, how can you support AIPAC? They talked to Trump. How can you support? They talked to Jim Jordan. How can you? And I looked at them and said, now you're begging America to support Israel. And we've been doing that work over the last 20 years, and you've been scorning us for doing it. How dare you? How dare you? And don't ever take Israel's security for granted again. And that's where we are right now. And for those of us who look at our colleagues and say you took Israel's security for granted, we're really, really angry. And we've had enough of this, for sure. But I will report back when I find out what the next step is. All right, thank you all. Have a great day.